Ilara had learned many things during her 3 months aboard the Talons' Rest, the massive dreadnought that served as home to the Vryn warrior clans. She'd learned that the Vryn, despite their fearsome reputation as the galaxy's apex, predators had a peculiar fondness for what they called heat-sharing. She'd learned that their crystalline eyes could see in 17 different spectrums, yet somehow they still managed to trip over her boots. She'd learned that their dietary requirements included live prey at least twice a week, and that watching them hunt in the ship's biodome was both terrifying and oddly mesmerizing, but nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared her for the cubs the Vryn young were supposed to be in the nursery wing, a heavily fortified section of the ship, where the juveniles learned the ancient arts of stalking, pouncing, and tactical disembowelment. Ilara had been assured repeatedly that humans and cubs would have minimal interaction. The adult Vryn were protective to the point of paranoia, and the cubs themselves were considered too dangerous for soft species contact, which made the current situation all the more absurd. Ilara had simply wanted a nap. Was that too much to ask? After pulling a double shift recalibrating the ship's gravitational stabilizers, a task that required her to squeeze into maintenance shafts that even the slender Vryn engineers couldn't access, she'd retreated to her quarters, shed her uniform down to a tank top and shorts, and collapsed onto the heated sleeping platform the Vryn had installed for her comfort. The platform was designed to mimic the radiating warmth of a sun-baked rock, something the cold-blooded Vryn found irresistible. Ilara, with her mammalian heat production, had initially found it unnecessary, but after weeks in the perpetually climate-controlled ship, she'd grown to appreciate the soothing warmth. She'd been asleep for perhaps 20 minutes when she felt the first weight settle onto her legs. In her drowsy state, Ilara assumed it was a blanket that had somehow materialized. The Vryn were always doing strange things with their gravity manipulation technology. She mumbled something incoherent and tried to shift position. The weight didn't move. Instead, it began to purr. Ilara's eyes snapped open. Slowly, with the careful deliberation of someone who suspected they were about to discover something ridiculous, she lifted her head. A Vryn cub no larger than a house cat, with scales that shimmered in iridescent blues and violets, sat perched on her shins. Its triple-jointed tail swished back and forth in evident satisfaction. The cub's crystalline eyes, still cloudy with youth, fixed on her with unmistakable delight. "Oh no," Ilara whispered. "How did you—" Before she could finish the question, a second cub emerged from beneath her sleeping platform. This one, slightly smaller and sporting amber gold scales, regarded her with the calculating gaze of a seasoned tactician. Then, with the confidence of a creature that had never known fear, it climbed onto her stomach. The purring intensified. "Okay, this is fine," Ilara told herself, even as her abdomen compressed under the surprising weight. Vryn cubs might look small, but their dense musculature and reinforced bone structure made them considerably heavier than they appeared. "I'll just—" Very slowly. "Move you both." A third cub landed on her chest with all the grace of a falling brick. The air whooshed from Ilara's lungs. This cub, the largest yet, had scales of deep crimson with black striping. It settled into position with the satisfaction of a conqueror claiming new territory, then turned its head to emit a series of chirping clicks. "Karoo!" Another voice, higher, younger, responded from somewhere beyond Ilara's limited field of vision. "Karoo found the heatmaker." "Oh, wonderful." They had names, and apparently they'd been searching for her. What followed could only be described as an avalanche in slow motion. Cubs emerged from air vents, from beneath furniture, from behind wall panels that Ilara hadn't even known could open. They came in every color the Vryn genetic spectrum could produce: emerald green, midnight black, pearl white with pink undertones, and one that seemed to shift between copper and silver depending on the angle. They climbed. Dear God, how they climbed. One particularly ambitious cub with violet scales scaled Ilara's arm like it was a tree trunk, its tiny claws pricking through her tank top. Two more squeezed onto her legs, somehow finding space where physics suggested none existed. Another settled onto her shoulder, its tail wrapping around her neck in what might have been affection or a very inefficient attempt at strangulation. Karoo, the crimson cub who'd claimed pride of place on her chest, seemed to be directing the operation. He chirped and clicked, and the other cubs adjusted their positions accordingly, forming an increasingly complex puzzle of scales, tails, and purring bodies. "Can't breathe," Ilara managed to gasp. though the sound was muffled by the cub that had just settled onto her face. The cubs, interpreting her sounds as communication, purred louder. From a human perspective, the situation was dire. Alara was pinned beneath what had to be at least 15 cubs, each weighing anywhere from 5 to 10 pounds. The collective weight was crushing her into the sleeping platform, and her attempts to wiggle free only caused the cubs to adjust and settle more firmly. From the cubs' perspective, they had discovered paradise. The Heatmaker, this strange, soft creature that radiated warmth like a personal sun, had presented herself as the perfect resting spot. Her squishy exterior was far more comfortable than the hard scales of their parents or siblings. And when she made those funny wheezing sounds, it created fascinating vibrations that tickled their bellies. "Help," Alara wheezed, though whether anyone could hear her beneath the mountain of cubs was debatable. Karoo shifted position, his head now resting directly over Alara's heart. The rhythmic thumping seemed to fascinate him. He pressed one small paw against her sternum, feeling the pulse beneath. The other cubs, taking their cue from Karoo, began to knead. Tiny claws, not yet sharp enough to truly harm, but certainly sharp enough to be uncomfortable, pressed into Alara's exposed skin in a rhythmic pattern. It was, she realized through her oxygen-deprived haze, the Vryn equivalent of making biscuits. She was being biscuit-ed to death by alien predator babies. The absurdity of the situation might have made her laugh, if she'd had sufficient air in her lungs. Here she was, the only human on a ship full of the galaxy's most feared warriors, and her demise would come not in glorious battle or tragic accident, but smothered beneath a pile of purring cubs who'd mistaken her for a heated blanket. Through her dimming vision, Alara saw the door to her quarters slide open. "The cubs have escaped." The Vryn warrior's voice cut off abruptly. There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the enthusiastic purring of 15 cubs and Alara's faint, desperate wheeze. "This," the warrior finally said, his voice carrying the particular tone of someone trying very hard not to find something hilarious, "is going to require the commander." As consciousness began to slip away, Alara's last coherent thought was that she'd never live this down. The cubs, oblivious to the chaos they'd caused, simply purred louder and settled in for what they clearly hoped would be a very long nap.